Fishes encased in balls of mud like this have been able to survive dry seasons since the earliest of geological time. But others without this ability became extinct, and today we know many of them only as paleontological specimens. Stay tuned to Science in Action for the thrilling story of fossil fishes.
One of the greatest ichthyologists of all times was a scientist by the name of David Starr Jordan, who was also the first president of Stanford University. Now, in one of his studies on the fossil fishes of western North America, Dr. Jordan commented, "The purpose of this is to make old bones live once again." And that's exactly what we'd like to do during this program. And so let's start with a very abundant but now entirely extinct group of fishes known as the placoderms. This large armored fellow is Dinichthyes, and this is a form that was common in the Ohio region some 350 million years ago. Now, from the shale formations of that area, the Cleveland Museum has just recently sent this to us. Actually, Dinichthyes is just one of a large number of fossil fishes that we shall discuss. Now, to find out why some of these ancient forms have survived until the present time and why others have disappeared, we have invited as our guest on Science in Action the man who is responsible for keeping the David Starr Jordan tradition alive at Stanford University. He is professor of zoology and one of the world's leading ichthyologists, my major professor, Dr. George S. Myers. George, how have you been?
Fine. How are you, Earl?
Thank you.
Well, Earl, in talking about these fossil fishes, we've got to use their scientific names. You know, when these fishes lived, there weren't any people around to give them names. And so all we have are the scientific names that have been bestowed on the fossils.
Right.
Now, Dinichthyes, as you can see, was a rather interesting fish. He had this great sharp lower jaw that, of course, went down like this. But also he had another peculiarity that is not found in many other fishes. Here, on both sides, is another hinge joint so that the entire head of the creature could go up like this and the two jaws could come together like so to chop any of his prey.
George, I'm wondering about the size of Dinichthyes as compared with the other kinds of placoderms that lived in those early days. Is this large, small, or intermediate in size?
Well, this is a pretty large one. There were a few larger, but most of the placoderms were a great deal smaller. Now here we have a specimen, an actual fossil that is, as it is found in the rock, of Bothriolipus, a Devonian placoderm from Scominac Bay in Quebec in Canada. Now you'll see that here are the two eye spots, and this is the armored upper surface of the body. Now, of course, this upper armored surface corresponds with this part of Dinichthyes. In the reconstruction of this fish, you can see that the posterior part of the body was soft and was not armored.
The armored part then was only in the forward section, and this then is all that we have in the fossil record.
That is quite true, because the rest of the body was soft and the vertebrae were probably cartilaginous.
George, there's one puzzling thing about me here, to me about this group that is now entirely gone from the face of the earth. They had all this armor, and yet we don't have them anymore. And yet at the same time, we have today in South America, as you well know, some armored catfishes. And I'd like to look at these over in this next section here, because they seem to be doing all right, and in fact they are quite interesting little fellows. Now, why is it that Dinichthyes, Bothriolipus, and these other placoderms are no longer here, when this kind of armored fish is still with us?
Well, if Dinichthyes and its relatives had as complete an armor as these little catfishes and had been as active as they are, it's quite possible they may have survived to the present day. But of course, we are never sure.
George, one thing that the paleontologists tell us, in fact they seem to be in agreement on this, is that Dinichthyes and Bothriolipus, those two fossil placoderms, are important to us anatomically because they are the first kinds of fishes that actually had jaws.
That's true.
And they lived in a time which we call the Age of Fishes. Actually, it's Devonian time, as we see here. And to understand how far back this is, if we stacked up all the kinds of rocks that we know in the world, stacked them up vertically, and we put the oldest rocks down on the bottom, we would find that Devonian time would be in here about 330 or 350 million years ago. And as we come vertically, then we reverse this trend and we come to the younger rocks until finally we come up here to present time. Now we come over here to the age of fishes, and we've seen that our friend the placoderm is now gone from the face of the earth. So we'll just put a big X across him like that. Obviously then our present day fishes came from some other source.
Yes, that is quite true. However, in the Devonian times, there were also some other groups of fishes. One of them is called the ostracoderms. These animals, as you can see, had an armored head and a coat of mail over the body, but they differed from all of the rest of these fishes, in fact, from all the other vertebrates, the frogs and salamanders and reptiles and so forth, in the fact that they had no true jaws.
No jaws.
No jaws at all. They had a round sucker-like mouth, and they have survived only as the present-day hagfishes and lampreys. Now we have a lamprey here. This is an alcohol specimen of a lamprey. As you can see, it's a considerably different-looking creature from that ostracoderm, but it has the same sort of rounded, sucker-like mouth with little horny teeth in there to rasp.
In other words,
with.
the mouth then is right down on the inside of that entire structure, as we see. If we look at a close-up, we can see where it is located there. Well, let's see, the placoderms were not of use to us in finding out where our present fishes came from. That is, the placoderms, the ostracoderms, gave rise to these types you just talked about. So now we have to go up on our scale, a primitive bony fish known as Chirolepus, and over here a primitive shark, Cladosalaki.
Well, now the sharks, of course, were cartilaginous fishes, as the skeleton was not bone but cartilage. Cladosalaki was the oldest, is the oldest known of the shark fossils. It appeared in the Devonian, but it was perhaps a creature of 3 feet in length. Now, sharks in later times evolved into much larger creatures. For example, we have here the tooth of a fossil shark from California, Carcharodon tembloris, which was a relative of the present-day living great white shark or man-eater. This animal probably attained a size somewhat larger than that of the present-day man-eater, possibly 40 feet in length. Now, many years ago, the American Museum in New York produced a restoration of the jaws of a still larger shark of this particular group, which were big enough to engulf a man. It is probable that this shark must have reached a length of some 75 feet. That's a pretty big animal.
That is a tremendous animal. I'm just as glad that he didn't occur in our waters today, at least along our coast here. George, before discussing the further evolution of the bony fishes, I think it would be of interest to us to find out just how fossils are formed. And as you well know, there was an incident here some 2 million years ago in Miocene time, which is in the records as a very strange event, because about that time we had along our coast a special kind of a herring. This herring was called Zyne grex, and these are the backbones of this herring. Finger points to some of the backbones that we can see there. They were so abundant along our coast that it was difficult to go into any area without finding them. Now, in reconstruction, the herring looks somewhat like this, a very slender-bodied form. And one of the principal spawning grounds for this herring was in the shallow bays along the central California coastline. We're looking now at the coastline, and it has appeared in Miocene time some 2 million years ago. Now, in the area of Lompoc, which is between San Francisco and California, something hit that area when these herrings were in that region, and some 1,200 millions of them died at the same time and were embedded in this chalky material which we see here being excavated. In one area is 4 miles square. There isn't a single square foot that doesn't have 8 or 10 of these small herrings. So, George, my question to you is, what happened? Have you any idea what was responsible for this tremendous death of fishes?
Well, again, we are not too sure, but we do know that at the present time there are fish kills, as they're called. All the fishes of a particular area may die suddenly, This is usually caused at the present time by what is known as red tide. Now, this red tide is the result of the tremendous development in the water of billions of a minute microscopic animal with a red color. It tinges the water red, which is why it's called red tide, and is very poisonous to fishes. And any fishes which touch this red water die.
It could be then an ancestor of the present red tide that was responsible for the death of these herrings in the Lompoc area.
It could very well have been.
George, that material down there, that diatomaceous material, as you know, is extremely soft. You put your fingernail in it, and it makes a scratch.
Yes.
We have other kinds of fossils that are in harder rock.
We do indeed. Now, for example, here is a fossil herring from Southern California. You can see this is in very heavy rock. The outline of the fish is like this. This is the backbone. Now, you can't see very much of it from this particular fossil, but now the reconstruction of it that we have shows that it is a much more fat-bodied herring than Zyne grex was.
Well, we have other kinds of herrings as well, and
Yes.
some of these are different forms.
Yes,
This one here is rather
we
long.
should look at some of these other types of herrings that were found in as fossils in North America. This, for example, is one from the Green River deposits in Wyoming of early tertiary age. It is known as Notogonius osculus and has a still living relative very close to it in the tropical Pacific today. This creature here, another herring-like fish, is similar to some of the present-day shads. It is Copictus dentatus, also from this same deposit in the Green River region of Wyoming.
George, you know, in looking back at all this, it isn't strange that we should have herrings, but the fact that some of these herrings are of tremendous size is a thing that's quite startling. In fact, we have one at the Academy, as you know, that's so large that we couldn't bring it down here. So
Yes.
what we've done is to take a photograph. And if we can go over in this next section here, projected on the rear screen is this tremendous herring, which in total length would be something like 17 or 18 feet. And I noticed one thing up there, George, that I'm wondering about that horn on the top of the head.
Well, of course, we don't know what it was used for by that fish, but we might call it a rhinoceros herring on account of that.
A good name. And what we've done, of course, is to take a photograph of the two sections of this and put them together so we get an idea of the total fish. And she measures from tip to tip then something between 17 and 18 feet. No herrings of that kind are known at the present time.
There certainly aren't. That was the biggest one ever known.
George, I'd like to go backward now in geological time to some of these early things. We talked about the early sharks and the early bony fishes. Suppose we go back and discuss a little
Yes.
bit more on those.
Well, we have some other groups here that we haven't talked about. As we mentioned before, this Chirolepis, or a fish somewhat like it, the same group, gave rise to the present-day bony fishes, the pike, the pickerel, perch, and fishes of that sort. Now, we have some other groups of bony fishes also. These three are rather closely related. They're all might be called lobe-finned fishes. You'll see that there is a scaly lobe at the base of the fins. The lungfishes appeared also in the Devonian, but they evolved very little. And the few living lungfishes that we still have today are very much like those that existed in the Devonian. Then we have this particular type of fish, the coelacanth, and it was supposed for a very long time that the last coelacanth died some 70 million years ago. Then in 1938, a single live specimen was taken off South Africa, about 5 feet long. We have here a scale from that particular example of Latimeria, the original one from South Africa. As you can see, it's a rather large fish scale.
Rough on that surface. I understand
Yes.
the natives actually use this to repair their bicycle tires when they have a puncture.
They do. They scratch the rubber with this before they vulcanize it. But this scale is much more like modern types than we ever would have expected to find on a fish of this type.
Well, Latimeria and the lungfishes then did not provide the answer we needed in getting from the fishes to the amphibians.
No, they did not. Instead, we have to go to this group of lobe-finned fishes, of which Eusthenopteron is an example. Now, we have here a specimen, an actual specimen, a small one, of Eusthenopteron. And you can see here the trilobed tail fin, the dorsal fin, the anal fin, the ventral fins down here, and the pectoral fins here. Now, in the reconstruction of this animal, in the pectoral region, you can see 3 bones larger than the others, and these have been identified as the forerunners of the humerus, radius, and ulna of the arm in the higher vertebrates, that is the amphibians, the reptiles, and the mammals. Now, Eusthenopteron, of course, is represented here, and it, or something very like it, must have given rise to the amphibians.
Well, George, all of these fishes then, as I understand it, had the possibility of getting out on land and perhaps eventually becoming amphibians. This kind made it. These did not. Each of these, of course, has some special adaptations, and I think it would be of interest to us right now to find out how the lungfishes have managed, for example, to survive for as long as 4 years out of water and still survive when they're put back in the water again. We have a demonstration here, and I think perhaps we could start this. May I give you a synthetic mud ball, sir?
Yes, sir. Thank you. The lungfishes, of which this is one here, in Africa, when the dry season comes and their ponds and streams dry up, form a cocoon of mud, such as this one, in which they estivate until the next rains come along and fill up the ponds again.
George, perhaps we could start with this lungfish, which we have in this tank here. He's in pretty good condition right now, and I think if we scoop down here and get him into... Whoop, we just lost one lungfish on the floor, and that's a $200 fish, so pardon me, I'll see if I can get him up here. Now, lungfishes, as you know, travel overland for long distances, so that shouldn't bother him too much. We'll take him over here and put him into this soupy mud, which is about ready for this lungfish to start in making a mud ball. Now, you notice that he's at the surface here, and he will probably stay at the surface for some time until this mud becomes even more viscous than it is at present. And when that occurs, then he will dive down into the mud and will start making a mud ball, forming then the sort of thing that is shown on this sketch. And I'll just drop this in front of the tank. And you can see that the fish, after a period of time, the tail and the head are both directed vertically, and extending up from this cocoon are the breathing pores, which allow the fish to breathe, and it lives on its own body materials. It survives by its own body materials during the period of time it happens to be there. So we brought it up to about that time. In other words, he goes into this mud ball, and then the next stage then would be the coming out of the mud ball.
Well, now we'll take this mud ball here and put it into the aquarium, trying a laboratory demonstration of what happens to these things. Now, the mud will begin to dissolve.
And then after a period of time, of course, then the lungfish will be freed from this cocoon, and then he's able to swim out, and it takes him a while, of course, to get back to normal again. But if we were to follow through with this procedure then, and in this last tank we have a mudfish, which we believe has survived this kind of a procedure. So let me see if I can scoop him up in the net here, and we'll see if this incarceration in this mud ball has had any effect on him. Oh, here he comes here. I think I have him.
Don't lose this one on the floor.
And we'll put him out here and see what he looks like. I can hold him up towards the camera here, and I'll have to be very, very careful because the lungfish has a fantastic dental apparatus that the natives in Africa will not even go into the same net area where they're netting these fellows. And here we see him here. He seems to be perfectly all right. We'll have to put him into clear water, and there he goes back down. I'm going to leave this right here at this point, if you don't mind, George.
Yes.
Because it's a little bit gooey. You know, by way of summation, George, could I ask you what your official viewpoint on this is? Here now we have certain kinds of fishes that were present when many of these archaic forms that are now extinct were on the surface of the Earth some 350 millions of years ago. These have survived, the others have disappeared. What's responsible for this?
Well, we never know in any particular instance, or seldom have any secure knowledge. But we do know that animals that are well adapted to their environment can exist in that environment for millions of years without changing. But if the environment changes, then the fish has got to get out or change himself. And if he can't, he becomes extinct. If he has the ability to adapt himself to new conditions, then he may go on and evolve into all sorts of other things.
This then would apply to higher animals and even to man.
That would indeed. If man cannot adapt himself to the situations in the future, he also will become extinct.
Dr. George Myers, I want to thank you, sir, for coming to Science in Action to tell us about fossil fishes. Thank you, sir. We hope you enjoyed our program. Please plan to be with us 1 week from this time, once again, on Science in Action. Thank you very much.